So this happened to me almost 7 years ago now. I should give some background info before getting into things. At the time this all happened, I was around 16 years old, and I had a friend that I'll call Karen, who's dating a boy named John. At this point in time, Karen and John had been dating for maybe 6 months, and after going out with Karen and John on many occasions, they decided that they wanted me to hook up with John's friend, Cameron. At this point in time, I had met Cameron in person once. He was pretty nice, and I gave him my social media, and we had chatted a couple of times. It's important to note that he didn't have my number or even know where I live. Now it's time for the story. Fast forward to one night, maybe a week or two after I met Cameron. I'm laying in bed and it's about 2 or 3 in the morning, and I get a call from an unknown number. Thinking, why the hell is an unknown number calling me at this time at night? I decide to answer it and see who it is. So I answer the phone and say hi, and a man responds saying hi back. Since I didn't recognize the voice on the other end, I asked the person who they were. Instead of giving me an answer to this question, the man on the line tells me to look outside my window. Thinking this is probably a prank call, I tell the man to F off and I hang up the phone. Once I did this, the number called back again, but I didn't answer it. The person then proceeds to call me another 4 times until I finally answer the phone, which again, I ask who the heck is calling. This time the person responds and tells me that one of my friends gave him my number, and that I'm the guy he's been talking to. At this point, my stupid 16-year-old mind is trying to rationalize this, and the only person I can think of is Cameron. Before I can say anything to this person, he again tells me to look outside my window, and I begin hearing noises outside the window. Now I should mention that my room is right beside my parents' room, and being stupid, my first thought was that this fool was going to wake them up, and that I'd never hear the end of it. Let me tell you, that thought soon turned into the last thing I would worry about that night. Anyway, at this point, I'm also starting to get creeped out, and I'm thinking to myself, if this is Cameron, and Karen did give him my number, how the hell would he know where I lived? So I reply to the man and say, Cameron? The man says yes, and tells me to look out my window. I reply telling him to go home and hang up the phone again. Weirded out, I decide I'm going to get up and go into my basement and call Karen, so that hopefully my parents don't hear me talking from my room. This is really important because to get into my basement, I have to pass a door that is partially made of glass. So I get downstairs and call her, and she answers, clearly half asleep. I tell her about the unknown call, which I'm assuming is from Cameron, and how he is telling me to look out my window because he's outside, and on top of this, that I can hear someone out there. Karen, now clearly awake, tells me that she has never given Cameron my number or address, and calls John quickly from her home phone to see if maybe he did. At this point, John answers and tells Karen that not only had he not given my information out, but he is with Cameron. So they tell me if someone is outside, I need to hang up and call the police immediately. So I hang the phone up, and before I can even go to dial for anyone, I get another call. Guess who? Unknown number. So I stupidly answer again, and before I get a word in, the man tells me that he knows I'm in my basement, and that he saw me walking by my back door. Now I'm clearly disturbed, as I did just walk by my back door to get downstairs, so I know someone is actually outside. Again, before I could say anything, the man told me to come outside. So stupidly, I tell the person I'm calling the police and I hang up the phone. Why I hadn't called the police at this point, I really don't know. Probably because I was 16, stupid, and literally in panic mode. Not more than a minute later, I get another call. I answer again, and the man tells me to come outside or he's coming inside to get me. Clearly panicking at this point, I have this deep gut feeling that if I go outside, I'm never coming back. However, I do have to go by the door again to get back upstairs, and that was equally terrifying me. So I hung up the phone again and mustered up the courage to run upstairs, because the last place I wanted to be was in a part of my house where no one else was in. I keep getting more calls. Unknown number, unknown number. Again, my 16-year-old self stupidly answers. This time the voice on the phone sounds shook. It says to me that police stopped him outside my house, and that they want to speak to me to make sure I know him. And the phone then gets pressed off to someone who identifies himself by name, which I no longer remember, and asks if I know the man outside my house. He says my house number and street. I quickly tell the voice on the phone I have no idea who the person calling me is, and I hang up the phone. I never got another call again. However, I did sit there all night holding a bat, and I had problems sleeping for months. I should also mention that I didn't have many friends at this point in my life, and looking back on this night, I thought maybe this was a prank taken too far. However, I begged a few friends I did have for months to admit that one of them was the person who pulled this off. And to this day, they all insist none of them did this. So whatever got this person to stop calling me, thank you God. Back in 2007, shortly after my 15th birthday, my mom was out of town for a few days on a business trip. My mom and I lived alone in a small house in a neighborhood that was on the sketchier end of decent, and that fact combined with her paranoia about me being home alone, longer than 4 or 5 hours, meant that I had to stay over at a friend's house while she was gone. This friend's house was across the street and over one house from my own, and the place my mom was going was only about 2 hours away. And I had gotten a bug up my ass about being treated like the young woman that everyone kept calling me. So, for the week leading up to the trip, I was moaning and groaning about being old enough to take care of myself, and insisting that I could just check in with my friend's parents every now and then. But in truth, my house was pretty creepy at night, even when my mom was there with me, and I'd found out the day my mom was scheduled to leave that my friend had somehow gotten her hands on a PlayStation 3, so it didn't take me too long to get over being unfairly babysat. At around 11 on the last night I was there, we ended up back inside my friend's room, screwing around with the brand new flip phone that I had gotten for my birthday. Her parents had gone out hours earlier after buying us a pizza for dinner and probably weren't going to be back for at least an hour, and we'd gotten bored downstairs with her one PS3 game that we had been playing for days already. It was too late to call any of our friends, but I knew my mom was coming home tomorrow morning at some ungodly hour, and I knew that she had this thing about her answering machine. No matter how tired she was, no matter where she had gotten back from, if there were any messages on the answering machine, she listened to all of them. So being the bored 15-year-olds that we were, my friend and I decided to leave a message or two for my mom to find in the morning. We called my home phone and put it on speaker, cracking up and trying to figure out what our message was going to be about. It normally took 5 rings for a call to go to the machine, but on the 3rd ring, the phone picks up and we hear, "Hello?" The voice sounded like it belonged to some 60-year-old guy who had been smoking for the last 40 years of his life. But even past that, there was this menace to his voice. Can't describe it exactly, but it sounded very cold and very dangerous. Sort of voice where if you heard it on the street, you'd want to get away from that person immediately. I looked at my friend, and her eyes were huge and her face was completely pale, and I'm sure I didn't look any better. Neither of us could get it together enough to say anything in response. "Hello?" he said again. There was a pause, and I tried to squeak out something along the lines of, "Who the hell are you, and why are you in my house?" But then he said in a very low voice, "You shouldn't have called." There was some sort of slam and the call disconnected. I immediately dropped my phone and proceeded to freak out, as did my friend. She asked me if I knew who that was, and I said no. Of course, I didn't know the creepy-ass guy answering my phone at 11 at night. We checked the call log to see if we'd accidentally called the wrong number, but no, it was the right number. We were so shaken up that we couldn't immediately figure out who we should call or what we should do. If we should call the cops or call my mom, or even call my friend's parents, or even just run around making sure all the doors and windows were locked or what. So we ended up sprinting around my friend's house, double checking every lock we could check, while gasping out what happened to my friend's parents on the phone. So for 10 minutes, we were huddled in the far corner of my friend's room, basically under her bed, jumping every time we heard the house settle or one of our legs scraped on the carpet. You can imagine how freaked out we were when her parents rushed in and started rattling at her bedroom door, forgetting that it was locked on their orders. The cops got to my house not too long after her parents got home. To be honest, I don't really remember a lot of the specifics about what the cops were doing, mainly because I refused to step foot outside the house, but I remember that they asked my friend and I a lot of questions. We couldn't really give them a lot of information, sadly. Unfortunately, we called them from my friend's room, which was in the way back of her house, away from where we would have been able to see my house. And the dude with the creepy smoker's voice isn't a very helpful description to go off of when looking for someone. There wasn't really anything messed up and nothing was taken. But our wall-mounted corded phone was hanging off the hook and the phone base itself was cracked, like it had been smashed with something. Both my mom's room and my room also had some stuff moved around and displaced. like someone was going through our drawers and the stuff in our rooms. My mom got called at some point during all of this and managed to get home that night, very tired and very freaked out about what happened. The cops investigated the incident, but never came up with any answers. We weren't doing too well financially at that point, but we still managed to move across town within a few months of this happening. For the months between that night and the day we moved though, I slept like shit and I had really bad nightmares. I also flat out refused to be alone in the house, even if it was just for a couple of minutes. And I started getting really obsessive about double checking the locks, a habit which has stuck around since this happened. And now that I've written this all out, I remember that there's one thing I haven't told anyone about all of this. Mostly because at the time, I thought that the whole thing might get blamed on me if I said anything. Earlier that day, I'd gone back over to my house to get a notebook of mine, full of writing that I wanted to show my friend. Nothing was obviously wrong as far as I could tell. The front door was locked when I got to it, and no signs of any tampering with it or any weirdness by the door. No noises from any part of the house. But the minute I stepped inside, something just felt off. It was really, really quiet, and I was getting chills all up and down my spine, and I had goosebumps all over. I tried to will myself just to get over it, to go back to my room and just get the notebook, but I couldn't make myself take more than a few steps into the house. I was too creeped out. I locked the door and I ran back across the street. When I got back to my friend's house, I kind of felt like an idiot, of course. Was I really such a wimp that I couldn't walk through my own house when it was empty? But looking back, well, who knows? Maybe my gut was right about something just not being right. It freaks me out even thinking about what could have happened if I'd ignored it and walked further inside. I've thought back on that moment a lot too, wondering if maybe I left the door open when I left, but there's just no way. I distinctly remember locking the deadlock and looking over my shoulder the whole time, because I had that burning, crawling feeling on the back of my neck that you get when you're being watched. And after the creepy call, I checked and I had my keys in my backpack. This started last Friday and it's been going on for the past week. I am part of a church Facebook where you post your needs and people will fulfill if they can. Or you post something you have to offer and people reply if they need it. Take a penny, leave a penny style. Someone posted on Facebook that they needed an item that I happened to have, so I replied stating I had one that they could have. They sent me a PM and we started to arrange for pickup. The guy then told me he had posted for a friend and it was his friend who would be taking it. We had to change pickup days because of some scheduling conflicts, so he said a different friend would be picking it up, because that was who was available to pick up that day. He asked for my phone number so they could let us know when they were on their way. I don't know if it's a crazy coincidence or not, but within 1 hour of giving my phone number, I got the first phone call. My phone rang from a restricted number, which I normally ignore, but for some reason I answered. There was a man on the line talking in a low, deep, slow voice. Him. You call for the service? Me. Oh no, I'm sorry. I think you have the wrong number. No, I don't. You need the massage and the giant, you know what. Me, no? Then he hung up. At that point, I kind of laughed, thinking it was some teenage boys pranking me. But the more I thought about it, the more I was a little bothered. There was no giggling and no laughing, like no amusement at all in the man's voice. Not only that, but I'm completely unlisted, so my phone number isn't available anywhere. I shrugged it off and continued on my weekend. I somewhat forgot all about the instance until on Tuesday, a blocked number called me twice. I didn't answer either time and immediately got nervous and remembered to call on Friday when I saw the blocked number. On Wednesday, the number called me again, and this time I answered, thinking it was someone from my work. My computer was with our IT center, and it was this creepy guy again. This time he got straight to the point. I answered, hello, and he replied, I'm going to F you in your you-know-what. I asked how he got my number, and he hung up. It was definitely the same voice from the call on Friday. I remember that the first call came within an hour of giving out my phone number to the guy on Facebook, and immediately I got creeped out, because I also gave that person my address so they could come pick up the item. About 20 minutes after that phone call, my phone rang again with the blocked number, but I didn't answer. I decided at this point I want to confront the man on Facebook. I had given my number and address out of kindness in the midst of giving him an expensive item that I happened to have an extra of, And almost immediately after doing so, I started getting these obscene calls. So I wrote to him on Facebook, explained that I've been getting these calls, and asking if he shared my number with anyone. He wrote back apologizing, saying he was sorry I had to go through his friend, and said he gave my number to the two guys. The first one who was supposed to pick up, Jose, and then to the second one who ended up picking up because of the reschedule, Mike. He gave me their names and phone numbers and asked that I please let him know if I find out they are behind it. My husband and I decided at this point that I need to download a call tracking app. I found one that will unblock blocked numbers, so I got it to try to use it next time they call. They didn't call at all the next day, but just about an hour ago, I got another call from them, and unfortunately, the app doesn't work. It just shows up, 9999. I answer and the conversation goes along the lines of, him. Who's this? Me. No. Who is this? Him. You know who I am. No, I don't. Stop calling me. Him. But I want to taste you. Okay, how'd you get my number? Him. But don't you want me? No, I don't want you. Stop calling me. Who is this? Is this Jose or Mike? Him. Is this Michelle? No, my name is not Michelle. If you're trying to reach Michelle, you're calling the wrong person. Who is this? You know who I am, he says. How the hell did you get my number? Then he hangs up. At this point, I don't really know what to do. I keep telling myself it's just some idiot prank calling me, and they keep calling back because they get an answer. But in my gut, I don't feel like it is. There's no amusement in his voice at all. No laughing. Nothing. Just a low, slow, deep voice. The tracker didn't work, and he didn't respond at all when I gave the names the guy from Facebook gave me. If it is the guys from Facebook, they also know where I live, and that terrifies me. Not only for my own safety, but I also have 2 kids under 5 years old, and I babysit another 3-year-old during the week. I have small kids I'm responsible for. Part of me feels like it might not be them, but if it's not, it's an insane coincidence that the calls started the same day I gave him my number. When I was 18, almost 10 years ago, I had a phone call that completely changed my life. I got woken up at almost 6 a.m. by an unknown number. I figured it was my boyfriend, now husband, since his phone usually showed up as the famous unknown number. He usually called me before going to work around 7:30 a.m., but sometimes he'd call me at 6 o'clock if he wanted to talk to me while waking up. I answer and he says, "Hey baby," and I'm still half asleep but start talking. He tells me he has a little problem and that he's feeling really, So being 18 and just having started dating him recently, let's just say I was very willing to, So we start, and he tells me how he absolutely loved seeing me last weekend and how good I looked, and how he absolutely loved what I wore. He basically described what we had done during the weekend. If I remember properly, his parents weren't home for the weekend, and we had the house and the car to drive around. And we had lots of fun, obviously. And he was saying how much he loved some of the things I did to him. I replied. I was more and more awake, and we were having a really good time. Then I noticed it was almost 7 a.m., which is the time where he usually takes his shower and eats, and gets ready to go out the door. And I basically asked him, "So this is fun and all, but aren't you going to get ready for work?" This is giving me chills typing it, but he basically replied, no. I think I'll skip work today. How about I just come over? Now the thing is, by then I was pretty awake, and although the voice that was talking to me was very similar to my boyfriend's, something threw me off. My boyfriend doesn't say the, no, like he did. Besides, I knew that unless he was sick, my boyfriend would never skip work because he was scheduled on shifts, and missing a shift was a big deal that could get him fired. I kind of froze, but he noticed it, and so he said, "Oh babe, yeah, you're right. I should start getting dressed. So you want me to come over?" By then, I swear that his voice was back to my boyfriend's voice, and I just felt silly. So what if he wanted to skip a day at work? Maybe he just really wanted to see me. So I tell him, "Yeah, sure, come over. It will only be us here." And he replied, "Great." Then he asked, "Where is it?" Wait, what? Obviously my boyfriend knows where I live. He had been coming over for weeks now. I laughed it off and I told him, "Ha, you know where it is." That's when he laughed. And his laugh was absolutely not my boyfriend's laugh. I instantly told him, "You're not my boyfriend, are you?" he said. "Can you just hang on, please? I need to grab something." Meanwhile, I get a text from my boyfriend. I figure that maybe, just maybe, this is a sick joke. Maybe he executed this joke perfectly. Maybe he's sick and his voice doesn't sound the same. The text from my boyfriend said, "I'm at the subway, going to work now, love you." I texted him saying, "Why are you texting me? We're talking right now." At which point, my actual boyfriend called. He was very confused at first and figured someone had hacked into his MSN. When I told him it was by phone, he reassured me that he absolutely did not call me and that whoever it was not him. He had to go as a subway train was there, but said that he would call as soon as he was at work. Then the other guy called back. I picked up and I asked him, "Who are you? What do you want?" I pretty much went crazy on him. He said that his name was Mike and that we had met a long time ago, which was impossible because my phone number was fairly recent, that he just wanted to have fun, and that he didn't know I had a boyfriend. I asked him how he knew what I was wearing and what we did, and even how he got my phone number. He just said, "Where are you? Why don't we meet?" At which point I hung up. He called again, but I didn't answer. Within minutes, I had called my mom to tell her what happened, and she told me to change my phone number and not to stay home alone. I changed my number right away, and I also alerted local police. They opened a file, but nothing ever came out of it. I still wonder how he knew what we did and what I was wearing, but my boyfriend swore at the time he would never let any of his friends know all of that. But his parents' house did have lots of windows, and we weren't exactly careful.
I had gotten home from work about an hour ago and was hunkered down inside for the night, sitting on my bed and watching TV. There was a storm outside. We don't usually get too many big thunderstorms around here, so nights like these always had me a bit nervous. A little bit into the storm, I heard something below me, like downstairs in one of the rooms. I thought it was just the house creaking, but feeling uneasy, I got up and checked anyway. There was nothing, so I filled up my water bottle and went back up to my room. I felt like I was only upstairs for another few minutes before I heard something again. It was a sound I was actually very familiar with and instantly recognized as one of my lamps in the living room falling over. I know it's weird how specific that is and how I'd know that, but the lamp was very unstable and would often fall if bumped into, and the spot I had it in, I'd bump into it pretty often. However, even though it was wobbly, it had never fallen over on its own before. I got back up and went downstairs to the living room, seeing the lamp laying in the middle of the room. I walked over and picked it up, but something just didn't seem right about this. The storm wasn't shaking the house very much at all, so the lamp falling over on its own just didn't make much sense to me. But I almost just had to assume that that's what it was, because there was nothing else to tell me otherwise. Even then, in my gut, I knew that that wasn't the case. I checked around the bottom floor for anything else, but eventually went back up to my room. I turned down the volume on the TV and listened to the storm a bit closer. Maybe it was worse than I thought and was shaking the house. I was up there for a while longer, say 45 minutes, when I felt like the rain got louder all of a sudden. Maybe I didn't notice it before, but it sounded different, almost like it was in the walls. I'm not sure how to describe it, but I knew it was off. I opened my bedroom door and could immediately hear it more clearly, coming from downstairs, so I walked down there and tracked the sound down the hallway. At the end, near the kitchen, there was an awkward door to a storage closet that I knew had a window in it. I could hear the sound of rain pouring down from behind the closet door. I felt the anxiety build up in me as I opened it and saw the window wide open. Water was puddling on the boxes below the window, and rain was slapping against the windowsill. It had been at least 6 months since I'd last been in this storage closet, but I knew for sure I would have never touched that window, let alone left it open. I shut it to block out the sound of the rain, then faced the rest of my house, terrified and literally shaking. I had made the mistake of leaving my phone upstairs on my bed, so I could either run up and grab it or just run out of my house. I was honestly so scared I couldn't think straight. I carefully and quietly got my car keys from the kitchen, then started to slowly walk down the hallway toward the front door, hoping if someone was in here, they wouldn't hear me. I got about halfway there before a sudden burst of footsteps sprinted down the upstairs hallway right above me. They were going toward the stairs, and in a panic, I ran right to the front door. I could hear them getting close to the bottom as I ran out into the rain. I got into my car, backed out, and drove away without even looking back. I was able to dial 911 through my car. The officers found nothing but an empty house when they got there. Looking further into it, the wall in the closet that had the window ran along the end table that had the lamp on it. So likely the vibrations from trying to bust open the old window knocked over the lamp. Whoever had broken in didn't leave any clues on what they broke in for. It seemed like they had found somewhere upstairs to hide and were probably waiting for me to go to sleep before doing whatever they were going to do. Whether that was to rob me or what, I don't know. It's still really disturbing knowing there was someone walking around my home right outside my bedroom door that night while I was just sitting in my room watching TV. Even now, I randomly get unsettled when just hanging around my home, feeling like I'm not alone. It was a pretty typical night in the middle of March. I worked at a gas station at the time. Usually I did afternoon shifts, but every once in a while I'd cover for someone's overnight shift. I had gotten a call in the morning to come in from 10 p.m. to 8 a.m., all of which would count as overtime, so I quickly agreed. I got in and took over for the manager, then sat behind the front counter. It was pouring outside, and supposedly a big storm was gonna roll in later. Seemed to keep most people at home because the gas station was dead. After sitting inside for an hour, I threw on my raincoat and ran outside to prepare the station for the storm. There were a bunch of loose things hanging around the pumps that needed to be brought inside. I started picking them up and running back and forth to drop them off, and as I was grabbing the last few, I noticed a man not too far away from the gas station. He was on the side of the street, pacing around and getting drenched by the rain. It was very unusual, though it looked like he was probably just waiting for a ride. I finished up and headed inside. 2 hours later, thunder started rumbling in the distance, and soon after, heavy winds and even harsher rain came swooping in. I knew it would be bad, but this was insane. The wind smacking against the sides of the building was actually making the whole room shake, and at one point I even thought the front doors were gonna snap off the hinges because they swung open so fast. I hurried over and secured the bolt lock to keep them in place, then moved toward the back of the building and into the storage room, away from all the windows, and I just waited. I want to say it was maybe 30 minutes after the storm has started. I was still in the back of the building when, through all the harsh noises, I heard a muffled sound. It wasn't until I heard it multiple times that I realized it was someone banging on the front doors. I left the storage room and looked down the sales floor. There was someone outside, looking in at me and hitting the doors repeatedly. I hurried over and unlocked it, thinking he was in trouble and needed help. He quickly ran inside, and I closed and locked the doors behind him. The man was soaking wet and had pools of water draining from his jacket and spilling onto the floor. He didn't stop to thank me or explain himself. He just kept walking, back and forth, pacing across the floor. It was the same man I'd seen outside earlier. Had he been out there the whole time? It had been over 2 hours since I'd seen him. I tried asking if he was okay, and if I needed to call for help. but the man just kept pacing the floor with this blank, hollow look in his eyes. After watching him for a minute, I got really uncomfortable and started to walk to the front desk to call the police. As I picked up the phone though, his eyes snapped at me and he stopped walking. It was then, as we looked at each other, that I noticed his hands were cut. Like right on the knuckles, they were bloody and bruised. I caught myself looking for too long, and by the time I looked back up at the man's eyes, I could tell he was pissed. "Don't," he said, clearly talking about me using the phone. I wasn't trying to test him, so I lowered the phone. There were a couple seconds where he just stared at me, like he was thinking about whether or not to do something. But then he turned and continued to pace the floor. The storm picked up outside, chaotically shaking the building and adding to the horror of whatever was happening. I tried to think out all my options as this maniac walked around just feet from me. I could try running, but I'd have to get the door unlocked and outrun him in the storm, which seemed really risky. I could also try calling the cops and hope he just leaves, but that was also risky. Funnily enough, I ended up choosing probably the most risky option, which was to do nothing and just wait. I stood there and watched him for, 20 minutes at least. At any point, he could have just snapped and ended me, but he didn't. After those 20 minutes, he gave me one last look, then walked over to the door, slid the bolt lock over, and walked out into the storm. I immediately called the police. I'm not sure if it was just because of the storm, or because they didn't think it was urgent enough, but it took over a half hour for a cop to show up. By then, whoever the hell that man was gone. They never found him. When the storm finally passed on the following day, there was a report filed for a missing woman. She never returned home from work that night after leaving the office at 11 p.m. Maybe I'm just connecting completely different things, but the man had clear signs of having attacked someone with blood and bruises on his knuckles, and the timeline seems to add up. Again, it's all just theories, but whatever I was in the middle of that night, I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. I was driving back from a late shift at work. I worked for security, so my hours were kind of all over the place. I'd gotten out at 1 a.m. this day. There was a pretty heavy storm going on. A lot of the roads had water building up on the sides, and almost nobody else was driving. The route I usually take is off the main roads, on smaller, less crowded streets, and for some reason I failed to realize I probably should have taken the main roads this time. It's not like they were busy anyway. As I was using one of these small side roads, I came up to a point that was flooded. It was hard to tell exactly how high the water was, but it looked like it might be several feet deep, which I was not comfortable driving through. I knew this meant I'd have to drive all the way back, so I was pretty frustrated. I put my car in reverse and started to back up to do a 3-point turn, when my car started frantically beeping. I hit the brakes, but didn't even know why it was beeping until I looked over my shoulder and out the back window. There was a car right behind me, like only 2 feet away from my bumper. It was almost like a jump scare because not once during the 10-minute drive down this one-lane road did I see any cars in front or behind me, and their headlights weren't even on. I sat there for a minute. I thought they would see me backing up and move, or they would see the flooding road and also turn around, but they didn't do anything. They just stayed right behind me. The rain ticking against my car and my headlights being the only thing lighting up the road only made this feel more unsettling. Eventually, I honked a few times. The longer I sat there, though, the more I felt like something was seriously wrong about this. Then their door opened. A man got out. He wore black clothing and had a hood covering most of his face. He came up to my window and knocked on it a few times. I didn't open it. The man didn't say anything. He just continued to knock on the window. This was so unusual and creepy, being that he was standing out during a storm on this empty road. I genuinely thought he had to be drunk or something. I decided to put my car in drive and try to inch forward, careful not to go too far into the flooded section. But the man followed right along my window. At this point, I was almost sure he was drunk. The way he was acting, not having his headlights on. I mean, he had to be. I was still nervous, but I thought I'd figured it out. Then, completely out of nowhere, someone knocked on the other side of my car. It was another man, wearing the same sort of clothing, and behind him, I could see another figure approaching my car as well. I was stunned for a second, but realizing I was running out of time, I moved faster, being less careful about the flood and just trying to turn my car around as quick as possible. There was a moment where my car lost traction for a whole 3 or 4 seconds, and I thought I had gone too far, but by some miracle it came back to me. I managed to get around them and drive away. Obviously, once I was back on the main road, I called the police. They drove down to the scene later that night, and oddly, the car was still there, right by the flood, but none of the men were there. They were able to trace the car's owner down to some random dealership hundreds of miles away that it had apparently been stolen from months ago. I don't really know what happened on that road, or how close I was to something horrible happening. I probably will never know. My grandparents live in a small cabin up in Alaska, so I don't see them very often, but last fall I made the road trip up there in my RV just to visit them for the season. A bunch of other family members flew in as well. As we got into October though, it started getting colder and the snow was supposed to be coming in, so I had to leave before the roads got too bad. The road that goes from Alaska and through Canada is famous for being extremely remote. There's no service along most of it, and it just goes through hills, valleys, forests, and mountains. Most people making the drive either sleep at the few truck rest stops or at public camping spots along the road. On my second day, I drove until 8 p.m. before finding a place to pull off for the night. It was a dirt road with a small spot between the trees to park and sleep at. I think a lot of people might find it unnerving to sleep in the middle of nowhere like this, but I did it pretty often in my RV, so I was used to it. I made myself something small to eat, then got in bed and turned on a movie to watch. It wasn't very long after I'd arrived though that I heard footsteps nearby. I sat up and opened one of the blinds, but I didn't have any exterior lights on, so my view was of nothing but the pitch-black woods. The footsteps sounded like they were from out there, but I couldn't confirm if it was a person or not. From what I saw when I pulled into this campsite, this was the only parking spot, but maybe there were more nearby that I didn't see. If it was a person, they had to have parked somewhere nearby, because there's no way they could have just been wandering around all the way out here. I thought about heading to the front of the RV and turning on the lights, but figured it best to just lay low. Maybe they didn't even see me here and were just walking back to their campsite. Or again, it might have not even been a person at all. After a few minutes, everything seemed good, and I continued watching the movie. I went to bed around 9:30, knowing I had to get up early to start driving again tomorrow. My eyes shot open to 3 loud knocks at the door to the RV. It was nearly too dark to see inside, so I switched on the reading light next to me. "I just need some water, please, and then I'll be on my way." It was a man's voice, deep, like they were older. My eyes looked at the clock. it was 2 a.m. If this guy really was out there in need of help, he had way more to worry about than just water. It had to be nearly freezing out at this time of night. "Why are you out here? How did you even get here?" I called out. There was a pause. "My truck broke down just a couple miles back. Just looking for some help is all. I don't mean any trouble." My gut feeling was that this wasn't right. Everything just wasn't adding up. I snuck my way over to the other side window and tried to peek out and see him. It was extremely dark, but I could make out his figure standing right up to the door. I thought it was really weird how close he was, like he might be trying to listen in or even try to break in. But then I caught sight of something else. Behind him, I could see more figures moving around in the dark, several, like at least 4 or 5. The man knocked again, almost banging on the door as if he was losing his patience. I quietly backed up and grabbed the keys, then took a deep breath before running to the front and quickly turning the RV on. As soon as I did, the headlights lit up multiple men in front of me, all looking mid-30s and 40s with scruffy beards and raggy winter clothes. They started yelling as I drove past them and circled back to the main road. I drove until I reached a gas station. By the time I had service and got police involved, it was far too late for anything to be done. What those men were trying to do is anyone's best guess. This fall, I didn't make the trip up there, and I'm starting to doubt I ever will again. I'd already spent the whole morning and most of the afternoon with family, so now it was just time to go home and wind down for the rest of the night. Maybe watch a holiday movie or something. I drove 45 minutes from my parents' home to mine. The roads were empty, as you could imagine, and if not for it being Christmas, it would have actually been kind of eerie. Everything was so quiet and motionless outside. Anyway, I got home around 8, pulling in the garage and heading inside. I flicked on the entrance light and immediately saw some papers spread across the floor in the hallway. It was all from a stack of mail I had sitting on the counter that I guess had fallen over. I didn't overthink it, I just picked it all back up and tossed it back on the counter. I did leave the house in a rush that morning, so maybe I ran past it and caused the pile to fall, and I just didn't notice. After cleaning it up, I walked around and turned on the rest of the lights, then went into the living room. I had a Christmas tree set up in the corner. It was one of those small fake ones that looked pretty sad, but it was better than nothing. I sat back on the couch and found a movie to watch, some new Netflix Christmas movie. It was actually pretty good. I watched the whole thing, but throughout the whole movie, I kept hearing something in my house. It was like quiet, almost inaudible creaks. I wasn't even sure if I was actually hearing it or not, because every time I'd think I'd heard something, I'd pause the movie and listen, but didn't hear it anymore. I took it as a sign that this Christmas day was over for me, as I needed to get to bed and sleep off the exhaustion of seeing all my family. I turned off the TV and all the lights downstairs and went up to my bedroom, walking in and turning on the overhead lamp. Without hesitation, I knew something wasn't right. I couldn't pinpoint what it was at first, but I knew my room was not how I'd left it. Something had been moved, and I quickly put all the pieces together of everything else I'd been experiencing since getting back home. My body felt numb, both fear and adrenaline taking over me. I walked back out into the hallway and looked down the staircase, trying to listen to see if whoever had been here was still here or not. I quietly went down, step by step, until I reached the bottom. There was no sound or motion at all. "Is anyone here? I've called the cops. Hello?" It was as I was saying that I realized my stupid mistake of not having called the cops yet. I started to go back upstairs, planning to lock myself in my room and call the police, when sudden footsteps rushed from the living room. It was too dark to see anything more than the Christmas tree branches swaying and a figure rushing away from it. I followed the sound into the kitchen and then the back door. They opened it and ran away. I was just standing there, frozen. Once I snapped out of it, I dialed 911 and locked the back door. I still don't really know what happened that Christmas night. Whoever had broken in hadn't taken much of anything, at least nothing that I really noticed. What I think is that they got in just as I was getting home, and once they heard the garage open, they probably sprinted through the kitchen, knocking over the papers, and hid. I know I saw them running away from the tree, but if they were hiding the whole time I was watching the movie, it wouldn't explain the noises I was hearing. Maybe there really weren't any noises, or it was something else entirely. The thought of them being right there in the corner of the room in front of me, waiting and watching me for 2 whole hours, is just horribly disturbing. I wish I had more answers and could tell you more, but that's everything I know. Police weren't of much help, and nothing has happened since. Hopefully, it stays that way. I'm nearing 30, and Christmas nowadays isn't as exciting as it once was. I usually take a trip down to whichever family member was hosting the get-together that year, and just hang out for the week, then go back home. It was always nice, but often there were just so many people that it was just a bit too chaotic for me. This was last year. I rented an Airbnb near my cousin's place, who was hosting the get-together. He lives kind of out in the middle of nowhere, so a lot of the options I had to rent were just small cabins. I chose one pretty much at random, and come a few days before Christmas, I drove out there. The first 2 days were actually really fun. I saw a lot of family I hadn't seen in years and enjoyed catching up. Then even more people showed up, like maybe 30 people total, stuffed in a 3-bedroom house. It was a mess. On Christmas Day, we spent the morning watching the kids open their presents, then had a big breakfast. I hung around until dinner time, then called in for the night at 7. I drove back to the cabin. The place was nestled away in the trees, just outside of town. I thought the cabin was fairly nice, though. When I pulled in and parked out front, I noticed shoe prints in the snow going up to the front door. I thought it had to be the Airbnb host, maybe wanting to check in on me or something. When I got up to the front door, it was clear they hadn't gone inside or anything. They just stopped, maybe waited for me to answer the door for a bit, then walked away. I went inside and tossed my jacket on the couch and sat in the sofa chair. I thought about texting the host to see what he stopped by for, but I figured if it was something important, he would have texted me, so I ended up forgetting about it. After only a few minutes of sitting down, I dozed off. It must have only been 10 or so minutes later when I woke up to a ring at the doorbell. I got up and walked over to the door, trying to rub the tired look off my face. I opened the door. There was a man with medium black hair and a brown jacket. He had a short smile and greeted me, quickly introducing himself as the host of the Airbnb and shaking my hand. I was still just trying to wake up, so I let him control the conversation while I just stood there and went with the flow. He asked me how my stay was, and then explained that he just needed to check on a few things. Again, I was just nodding, and too out of it to care about what he was saying. It was only after he walked past me and into the house that I realized I'd unknowingly agreed to let him in to check on some things. That almost immediately woke me up. He walked into the living room and kind of just stood there for a moment, looking around at the walls. It almost looked like he didn't even know what he was looking for. It was around then that I remembered it was still Christmas Day, which just made this whole thing even stranger. Why would he need to do this on the holiday? Couldn't he wait until tomorrow, or have come by yesterday? His strange behavior only made me feel worse. He was just slowly walking through the room, moving his head around and clearly pretending to be looking for something. The thought of him not being who he said he was began creeping into my mind. I was just so caught off guard by everything, and it being Christmas, I just wasn't expecting to deal with anything like this. Hey, do you think you could come by tomorrow instead? I've actually got a bunch of family that should be here any minute now. He stopped looking around and turned to face me. His face was stiff, and he looked almost angry at me for saying that. He then casually walked down to the front door as if he was going to leave, but instead, he closed and locked it. That instantly sent a surge of fear through me. I ran straight into the bedroom and locked it behind me. The man ran up only a few seconds later and began trying to open it. I had no idea what to do. My car keys were still in my jacket on the couch, along with my phone. I knew that I needed to act now, though. I looked at the back of the room. There was an old window, one with a handle that you push open like a hatch. I hurried over, hearing the door behind me bend and crack with each hit as I squeezed myself out of the window. I then bolted for the tree line. He must have heard me leave, or broken down the door right after I fled, because by the time I was in the woods and looked back, I saw him run out the front door. I was well covered by the dark though, and he didn't seem to know where I ran off to. He stayed out there for a while, like 20 minutes, before he finally got into his car and drove off. I waited an extra few minutes just to be safe, then ran back and got my phone, calling 911. During the investigation, the homeowner and Airbnb host came down, confirming he was not the one who stopped by the cabin. With this situation, there's not too much to go off of, so it can only be assumed that the man had found out that the cabin was an Airbnb and used that against me to get access to the place. His intentions after that aren't known, but it likely wasn't to just rob the cabin of its mediocre decorations. That night was a close call, and I don't think I'll ever be so trusting of anyone again. This was the first year I'd be spending Christmas alone. I think it sounds sadder than it was, but I couldn't afford the flight back to my hometown and couldn't take off any extra vacation time to make it worth it. Anyway, I always enjoyed seeing others' decorations and driving or walking around on Christmas Day. When I woke up, I turned on the old cartoon Grinch movie and made a nice breakfast and some coffee. Then I spent the next hour on FaceTime with my parents and siblings. After all that, it was probably around noon. I didn't have much else to do, but at some point I went out to get the mail, and when I opened the door, there were footprints in the snow on my porch. What's odd is that they were frozen over, like not freshly made in the powdery top layer of snow. They were clearly made hours ago, like overnight when it was well below freezing. I looked around, even though they clearly were not here anymore, then went out and got my mail. It was very strange. I don't know if I felt scared, but definitely a bit unsettled. I didn't really know what to do about it though. I tried to continue my day without worrying too much. After all, it was Christmas. I had some Hallmark movies play while I opened the gifts and letters that my family had sent in the mail. Around 3, I started getting bored and checked the weather. It was supposed to get a lot colder later in the day, so I decided to go for a walk around the neighborhood while I still had the chance. I bundled up and started down the sidewalk, looking at all the Christmas lights and taking in the calmness. A little bit into the walk, I noticed someone else walking in the neighborhood. They were the only other person I saw, and they were walking on the other side of the road. I thought nothing of it, but a few minutes later, they passed by me again. I did a double take, thinking I was seeing things, because there was no way we could have passed each other twice so soon, unless they turned around right after we passed each other the first time. I kept walking and came up to a split where I could either head back home or keep going around the neighborhood. I ended up going home. It wasn't because of the guy I saw. Sure, it was strange, but something else just felt off and made me want to head back. I went in through the front door, and eerily soon after I got inside, there was a knock at the door. I had only just taken off my boots and was still standing right by the door. My heart pounded in my chest like I knew this was bad. I looked out the peephole and saw a guy standing very close to the door, wearing a baseball cap tilted downward, covering his face. Weirdly, he seemed familiar. I didn't know why. At the moment, I thought it was just because he was the man I'd seen walking around the neighborhood. He knocked again. I knew he had to have already seen me enter. "What do you need?" I called out. They didn't answer. A few seconds later, they banged on the door again. I asked again what they were doing here and what they wanted, and watched out the peephole as he just stood there against the door and refused to answer or speak at all before banging on the door again. He then grabbed the door handle and started shoving his whole body into it. I backed away as the whole door shook, rattling from its hinges with each blow. It went on for maybe 20 to 30 seconds, then it all suddenly stopped. There was a pause, and then multiple people yelling. When I went over and looked, there were 2 cops outside my home arresting the man at my door. I was completely confused and unsure how this happened. I thought it was just some kind of miracle that they showed up at the perfect time. It turned out a neighbor had actually called the police and reported a man acting unusual, walking back and forth down our street for hours and standing outside my home. Even more disturbing though, I knew the man. He was an old ex from probably 6 years ago. He didn't even live in the same state as me anymore, and we hadn't talked at all since the breakup. It's scary to think that so suddenly, years later, he just decided to show up at my house on Christmas Day and try to break in. The cops found 2 knives on him, and in his car that he parked a few blocks away, he had a firearm and a whole roll of duct tape, both that he purchased just a few days prior. He admitted to nothing, but it's not hard to see what he was likely intending to do.
When I got inside my car, the snowfall had just started. I knew the drive wouldn't be easy, so I wanted to reach home as soon as possible. I gripped the steering wheel as snowflakes swirled outside, blanketing the empty road in a silent white haze. To feel more alive, I turned on some music, but 15 minutes down the ride, the car shuddered, lurching to one side as a sharp pop broke the silence. "Damn it," I cursed, pulling over onto the desolate, snow-blanketed road. As I stepped out, my boots crunched on the icy ground. The cold bit deep into my skin. Just when I was trying to take in the feeling of getting a flat tire in this isolated road, I heard a low whistle. A shiver ran down my spine. I thought I was alone here. I grabbed the flashlight from my car trunk and inspected the area. That's when I saw it. A red Chevy parked under a tree at some distance. I checked my phone. It's 9 p.m. Why would someone whistle a romantic tune in such a desolated road? I wanted to stay in the car, but what if the owner of the car is close by and could help me with my flat tire? Thinking this, I began walking towards the sound. The whistle grew louder with each step, but its source remained unknown, always just beyond the next bend. I stopped near a big tree. Behind the tree was an open ground followed by the edge of the cliff. The starry sky was visible from there, and under the stars, I could spot two people sitting by a fire pit under a canopy. Wow, can people be this romantic in 2024? I couldn't help but roll my eyes. I looked closer and saw a man and a woman sitting under the canopy. The man had his arms around the woman, and her long blonde hair dangled over his arm. The man was whistling, whispering into her ears, and even chuckling. The night around them was eerily quiet, except for the occasional rustle of leaves. The stars above were brilliant, but the way he looked at them, wide-eyed and grinning, made my stomach churn. He leaned in closer and whispered into her ears. "You ever wonder if the stars are watching us?" he asked, his tone playful but somehow wrong. "They see everything. They know everything," he chuckled, a low, strange sound that didn't belong in such a peaceful setting. The woman didn't reply, but he kept talking. "I told them about you," he said, his fingers absently tracing patterns in the air. "They're excited to meet you. Heh heh heh." His laugh was sharper now, almost giddy, like he was holding back some terrible secret. The cold crept under my skin as something felt very wrong about the entire situation. I was wondering whether I should ask for his help or not when I accidentally stepped on a twig. The snap broke the silence and the man turned towards me. In the faint light of the fire pit, I could see spots of something on his face and clothes. With trembling hands, I flashed my light on him. The light highlighted the streaks of blood smeared across his face and jacket too clearly. His eyes locked onto mine, unblinking, with a strange, hollow calm. A twisted smile tugged at his lips, as if he knew something I didn't. "Don't be scared," he whispered. Suddenly, he swiped his arm around the woman and she fell back on the ground. Her face finally revealed to me, and I let out a scream. The woman's eyes were gouged out with something sharp. Trails of blood were frozen on her pale cheek. She has been dead for more than hours now. My boot crunched again as I slowly started backing away. The man got up too, retaining the same evil smile. And then suddenly, he sprinted towards me, his boots heavy and deliberate against the snow. I turned and bolted. My heart pounded so loud that it drowned out everything else. "Wait, I'm not gonna hurt you," he shouted, his voice harsh and much too close. I risked a glance back and saw him coming closer. I almost bumped inside the car and locked it immediately. The man stopped right next to my car window. Tilting his head to the left, he smiled at me and then raised a claw hammer to break the window. I swear, I have never seen death up close before. He struck the window and a large crack appeared. I almost knew he's going to kill me now. He raised his hand a second time and I knew the glass will give in this time when headlights brightened the road. A car was coming. He looked at the car and then looked at me. His smile vanished and with very angry eyes, he walked away, disappearing into the woods. I knew this was my only chance. I stepped out of my car, gathering all my courage, and stopped the car. An old man was driving it. I begged him to take me to the police station. He did. When I came back to my car with the cops, the red Chevy was gone, and so was the man. I led the cops to the place where I saw the body of the woman, but only the canopy and the dying fire pit laid there. No sign of blood or clues were there. The cops started investigating the guy for a week, but he was never caught. Neither the woman's identity was discovered. Sometimes, I still wake up at night thinking he might be standing outside my window, waiting for one chance to silence me forever, just like that woman. Last Christmas, I booked this log cabin up in the mountains. After 3 hours of driving, I reached the secluded cabin that stood like a lone wolf in the snowy valley. Once I got down from the car, and I realized what silence can be. Other than the sound of a snowy breeze, I couldn't hear a single hint of life. Just when I was enjoying the view around, I noticed a man coming out of the cabin holding a lantern. He was wearing an old sweater ripped in places with baggy brown pants that have seen better days. His eyes were big and surrounded with dark circles like he hasn't slept in years. Toro escorted me to the cabin. Nestled in a quiet forest, the old wooden cabin stood as a relic of simpler times. Weathered logs, moss-covered shingles, and a creaky porch told stories of countless seasons. Inside, the scent of aged wood lingered, and a stone fireplace offering warmth and mystery. Showing me the kitchen and other needed amenities, Toro set out to leave. But just before closing the door behind, he turned to me. Sensing a worry in his mind, I asked, "Is there something else?" Toro looked outside. His tired eyes scanned the snow-covered woods and then whispered, "Do not go to the woods after dark." Saying this, he left in a hurry, like he wanted to run away from this place ASAP. I smirked, thinking how weird some people can be. He didn't need to tell me this, because no person with a sane mind would linger in the cold after sunset. I unpacked my stuff, took a warm bath, and then went to the kitchen to cook some dinner. As I sat to have my dinner on the table next to a large glass window, I felt a different kind of peace, something I haven't felt in a long time. I took a sip of the wine while watching the snowflakes dangling in the wind outside. The fireplace crackled with the burning woods. I was halfway down the dinner when the scream took place. Yes, a blood-curdling scream of a man in pain echoed outside. I almost jumped in fear. Someone's in trouble. Should I look outside? But Toro said, "Oh, forget what Toro said." The screams intensified, and I couldn't sit straight anymore. I slid right into my winter jacket and ventured out with a flashlight. The snowfall was getting heavier, and it was getting difficult to see. I stopped under a tree and yelled, "Anyone out there?" The scream took place again. This time, very close, but it ended abruptly, like something choked the voice of the person screaming. With a racing heartbeat, I followed the direction from where the scream came. There was a bushy area behind a tall pine tree. Weird sounds were coming from there. I peeked in and could see a dark figure that seemed like a woman from behind, hunched over the ground. The sounds were of chomping. Whatever that figure was, it was eating. I should have turned back right that moment, but my curiosity got the best of me, and I flashed the light on the figure. My blood froze as I got a glimpse of a man lying on the snow. His eyes were gouged out, and his mouth was open wide with blood rushing down his lips. And near him sat a woman with long black hair. She was eating flesh from his body. I could hear the crunching of bones and splatter of blood with her every chomp. Suddenly, the woman looked back, noticing the flashlight on her. I have never seen a scary face like this. Her entire face was white like the snow. She had 2 black dots on her forehead, and the teeth were stained with blood. Her eyes were glowing like a hyena. A stream of blood was dripping from her mouth, and she smiled at me. I couldn't stand there anymore. I started running towards the cabin. My legs were shaking, yet I couldn't risk a fall. I could hear my heart beating in my throat. I was literally scared for my life. When I got in, I slammed the door and locked it. I was so terrified that the woman would follow me to the cabin that I secured the door by pushing the couch next to it. The entire night, I stayed in the living room, crouching next to the fireplace. All I could think of was the face and the wicked bloody smile on it. I probably dozed off before dawn when I heard slow knocking on glass. I opened my sleepy eyes and noticed the big window. The snowfall had stopped by then. Fading moonlight was glaring in the dim valley, and in that light, I could see a figure standing outside my window. It was that woman from the woods. Her face was carved into a huge smile, and she was staring at me. I was horrified by this scene. I could hardly blink or move. I don't remember how long the staring competition lasted, but then the thin ray of sunlight hit the window and I fainted. I woke up hearing Toro calling out my name around 11 a.m. in the morning. I somehow carried myself to the door and opened it. He stood there looking at me with doubt and confusion. I didn't bother to clear his mind and just packed my things. When I handed him over the cabin keys before driving off in my car, Toro whispered to me, "You did see her, right? The white-faced woman?" I fumbled in fear and drove off without waiting a second more. Till today, I try to think logically of what I saw and heard that night in those woods. But somehow, my mind gives up and all I end up imagining is that ominous smile. I wish I never went to that cabin last winter. I'm a fitness instructor, and my job compels me to take care of my body. I go to the gym thrice a week and make sure to jog every day. Though since last winter, I go jogging in the evening since the city park is crowded at that time. And it's all because of what happened last winter. Usually, I preferred jogging in the early morning since the park was secluded with less distractions and cacophonies of people. But something happened that made me alter my lifestyle forever. It was a foggy winter morning. I took a shot of Americano, followed by some almonds, and set out for a run. I jogged through the foggy, empty streets, my breath forming ghostly clouds in the icy air. Each footfall echoed faintly, swallowed by the surrounding silence. The shadows of leafless trees twisted and stretched, their skeletal branches reaching like ghostly fingers. The cold bit into my skin, but the rhythmic motion kept me warm. It took 20 minutes for me to reach the city park from my house. The city park lay draped in a thick blanket of fog. Bare branches of towering trees reached skyward like they're asking for warmth desperately. Frost covered the grass beds, shimmering faintly in the muted morning light. As I started running on the winding tracks, I couldn't help but think how these usually lively paths have drowned into the deadness of winter. Their curves disappeared into the fogs, creating mystery. The park benches were cold and damp. The distant outline of the park fountain emerged like a ghostly apparition. The air was crisp and heavy, and there was complete silence around. Not even a bird was chirping that day, which did come somewhat odd to me. At this point, I was cursing myself for not charging my earbuds last night. Running in that eerie quiet did make things uncomfortable, no doubt. 10 minutes into the run, I began hearing a weird sound. It was like metal rubbing against metal. The sound was getting louder as I moved ahead of the track. The fog in front of me got thinner, and I noticed the park swing. On the left swing, there was a woman. She was swaying back and forth slowly. She looked wrong. Her messy, tangled hair hung over her face, and her pale, almost gray skin stood out in the dull light. She wore this tattered blue pullover with its sleeves rolled up to her elbows. Her pencil-thin hands with bony fingers gripped the chains tightly, making them creak with every swing. So this was where the sounds were coming from. The fog wrapped around her like it belonged to her, hiding most of her body. Every now and then, her head jerked slightly, as if she was stuck in a loop. It was unsettling. It was creepy. Now the track ahead went through that swing. If I continue, I'll have to jog and pass by her, which means she will see me too. Even though her behavior appeared frantic, she looked harmless. And I'm a pretty muscular guy, so even if she does something unexpected, I was confident that I'll be able to handle it. I increased my pace and ran to the swing's direction. As I passed her, I slowly turned my head to get a good look of her face. Surprisingly, she didn't even notice me. She continued swinging while staring at the grass. Her face looked blank, and her eyes were wide with dark circles around them. Thinking she must be going through a tough time, I felt bad for judging her too quickly. I ran past her, and then suddenly, the metallic creaking stopped. A bad feeling crawled on my skin. I slowly turned around and saw the woman wasn't swinging anymore. She is sitting still and staring at me. Something about her face had changed. There was a smirk on it, which looked terrifying. Then she spoke to me in a low but shrill voice. You know, Millie used to love swinging. She would beg me every day to bring her to this park. Even in that cold, I could feel sweat covering my forehead. I asked nervously, "Who's Millie?" She stared at me for a few more seconds, said nothing, did nothing, then suddenly started swinging real fast. She was swinging wildly while laughing like someone who just got possessed. Her maniacal laughter echoed through the foggy park. Her hair flew everywhere, and her eyes were wide like a crazed gleam. The swing groaned under her reckless movements as she kicked higher and higher, laughing like she'd lost her mind. And then it occurred, the loud metallic screech. Suddenly, the chains gave a sharp jolt and she flew off, slamming hard onto the frozen ground. The laughter stopped instantly. Her head twisted at a sickening angle. Her neck broke. She spit out some blood from her mouth, and then her body shivered for a fraction of a second. And then, the unsettling silence took over the park again. I was so shocked and horrified that it took me a few minutes to register what just happened. But when my senses finally kicked in, I dialed 911. The cops came and so did the paramedics. Her body was taken out on a stretcher, and I told the cops everything I could while shaking in that cold. People from the area were asked about her, and a few told her tragic tale. She had a 5-year-old daughter, Millie, who died of pneumonia recently. Not being able to survive the grief of losing a child, she took her last breath in front of me. It took me several nights to get sleep, because every time I closed my eyes, I could see her swinging and then breaking her neck on the hard concrete. I really wish she had someone to help her, so she wouldn't have given up on life like this.